The Rothschild Grand Ballroom breathed a perfumed air of jasmine and ambition, a world where every flicker of candlelight caught 1,000 diamonds. Lady Eleanor Vance, poised at the entrance, felt the cool marble beneath her slippers, a solid anchor against the swirling currents of anxiety and hope that warred within her. Her heart, a small trapped bird, beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs, whispering promises of a future she desperately craved. This night was meant to be the turning point, the moment her family's dwindling fortunes would finally find solid ground again, all thanks to Lord Arthur Blackwood. She adjusted the delicate lace of her gloves, a small, almost imperceptible gesture of composure. Her gown, a deep sapphire velvet, was a cherished heirloom, its rich fabric meticulously cared for through generations of Vances. Tonight, she hoped, it would speak of enduring dignity, not of fading glory. The dress felt heavier than usual, each stitch seeming to carry the weight of her ancestors' expectations, their quiet sacrifices. Eleanor took a slow, deep breath, letting the murmur of the grand orchestra and the gentle hum of polite conversation wash over her. It was a sound that always felt both welcoming and profoundly isolating, a symphony of society she navigated with practiced grace. Her eyes, a matching sapphire hue, swept across the opulent hall. Soaring ceilings gleamed with gold leaf, reflecting the soft glow of countless chandeliers. Polished marble floors mirrored the elegant dances already in progress, a dizzying waltz of silks and smiles. Every surface seemed a whisper of immense wealth, of power inherited and accumulated. Eleanor understood this world, had been born into its fringes, but she felt like an observer tonight, a guest holding her breath on the precipice of belonging. The scent of beeswax polish mingled with the heady aroma of expensive perfumes, creating a rich, almost overwhelming tapestry for her senses. Arthur. Her gaze searched the throng, a silent beacon seeking its counterpart. He was her future, the man whose name would secure hers, whose ambition would lift her family from the precipice of genteel poverty. She had envisioned this moment countless times, the announcement of their engagement, the quiet joy, the relief. A wave of warmth spread through her chest at the thought, momentarily eclipsing the gnawing unease that had settled in her stomach since breakfast. She tried to tell herself it was merely nerves, the natural trepidation of a significant occasion. Then she saw him, not alone, not looking for her, but absorbed in conversation near the towering, fluted columns on the far side of the ballroom. Lord Arthur Blackwood, her fiancé, stood tall and undeniably handsome, his dark hair gleaming under the chandelier light. His confident bearing was evident even from a distance, a natural charisma that drew people to him. He was speaking animatedly, his head tilted slightly, a charming smile playing on his lips. And standing beside him, receiving his undivided attention, was Miss Isabella Sterling. Isabella. The name echoed in Eleanor's mind with a faint, unwelcome chill. Miss Sterling, the heiress, the belle of every season, whose family fortune was spoken of in hushed, reverent tones throughout the city. She was a vision tonight, her blonde hair a cascade of shimmering gold, her gown a confection of pearl-embroidered white silk that seemed to catch every available light. Jewels sparkled at her throat and wrists, a dazzling display of inherited wealth. Eleanor's own sapphire felt suddenly modest, almost insignificant, a quiet whisper against Isabella's roaring declaration of prosperity. A small tremor ran through Eleanor, a sudden cold premonition she immediately tried to dismiss. Arthur had always been ambitious, she knew this. He spoke often of his political aspirations, his desire to restore his own family's prestige. But he had chosen her, Lady Eleanor Vance, of a proud lineage, albeit one struggling against the tide of modern finance. He had sought her hand, pledged his intentions, promised a shared future. Her engagement ring, a simple yet elegant sapphire, a Vance family heirloom, felt warm against her finger, a testament to his word. Yet there they were, Arthur and Isabella, their heads close, their laughter mingling easily with the music. It was a comfortable familiarity, a shared ease that pierced Eleanor's carefully constructed composure. She watched, her fingers locking around the delicate china cup of punch she held. If she let go, she knew she would spill it, a small, mortifying disaster in front of so many eyes. Her breath caught in her throat, a dry, uncomfortable sensation. What were they talking about so intensely? Why did Arthur seem so utterly captivated? A group of ladies passed by, their conversation a soft rustle of silk and whispers. Eleanor caught snippets of it. The sterling fortune, unimaginable wealth. Perfect match, wouldn't you agree? Such an eligible bachelor, Lord Blackwood. The words drifted, seemingly innocuous, yet they landed like small, sharp stones in Eleanor's already troubled heart. She tried to tell herself they were merely discussing society gossip, the usual pairings and possibilities. But the sight of Arthur, his hand lightly touching Isabella's arm as he emphasized a point, sent a jolt of ice through her veins. It was a gesture of intimacy, a subtle claim, too familiar for mere acquaintances. Her pride, that fierce, unwavering core of her being, urged her to walk away, to turn her back on the scene. But a deeper, more primal fear held her rooted to the spot. She needed to know. She needed to understand why her fiancé was behaving with such blatant disregard for her presence, for their impending announcement. A bitter taste like ash filled her mouth. The music, once a soothing backdrop, now seemed to mock her, its joyful notes feeling hollow and discordant. Eleanor remained, a statue among the moving figures, her gaze fixed on the tableau across the room. She noticed Isabella's eyes, bright and sparkling, fixed on Arthur with an adoration that seemed almost proprietorial. And Arthur, usually so reserved in public, so carefully composed, was glowing with a warmth that Eleanor rarely saw directed at herself. He leaned closer, a conspiratorial smile on his face, and Isabella laughed, a silvery sound that carried clearly over the general din. It was a sound that twisted something inside Eleanor, tightening her chest until breathing felt like a struggle. She felt a strange heat prickling behind her eyes, a dangerous prelude to tears. No, not here, not now. She would not allow herself to unravel in this gilded cage. She forced herself to breathe deeply, to straighten her shoulders, to maintain the facade of serene grace. Her family's honor, her own dignity, depended on it. But the truth was, she was afraid. A cold, creeping dread had begun to curl its tendrils around her heart, squeezing tighter with each shared glance, each conspiratorial whisper between Arthur and Isabella. The air in the ballroom suddenly seemed to thicken, growing heavy with unspoken tension. The vibrant colors of the dresses and the dazzling sparkle of jewels blurred at the edges of Eleanor's vision. Her mind raced, trying to find explanations, logical reasons for Arthur's behavior. Perhaps he was merely cultivating a connection, as a politician must. Perhaps he was simply being polite. But the look in his eyes, the almost possessive way Isabella returned his gaze, contradicted every rationalization Eleanor tried to construct. A sudden hush fell over the room, a collective drawing of breath. The orchestra faded, leaving only a residual echo in the vast hall. A tall, impeccably dressed man, the master of ceremonies, stepped onto a raised dais at the center of the ballroom. His voice, clear and resonant, cut through the last vestiges of whispered conversation, commanding instant attention. Eleanor's heart leaped, a sudden surge of adrenaline replacing the dread. This was it, her moment, her announcement. She gripped her cup tighter, her knuckles white. The master of ceremonies smiled, a wide, practiced gesture that conveyed immense gravitas. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying easily to every corner of the room. "May I have your attention, please?" A wave of anticipation rippled through the assembled guests. Eleanor felt her own anticipation surge, mixed with a profound sense of relief. The waiting was over. Her future was about to begin, solid and secure. She allowed herself a small, secret smile, a glimmer of hope breaking through the clouds of her anxiety. She watched the master of ceremonies, every fiber of her being focused on his words. Her gaze flickered to Arthur, who had now separated slightly from Isabella, though he still stood remarkably close. He was looking at the dais, his expression unreadable, a slight tension in his jaw. Isabella beside him seemed to be holding her breath, a faint blush on her cheeks. Eleanor found it curious, almost unsettling, but she brushed the thought away. Soon all would be clear. Soon she would be acknowledged. The master of ceremonies cleared his throat, a theatrical pause that built the suspense. He raised his hand slightly, as if blessing the occasion. "It is my distinct honor and profound pleasure," he announced, his voice swelling with importance, "to declare a momentous union that will undoubtedly shape the future of our esteemed society." Eleanor's chest swelled with a familiar pride. Yes, her family, the Vances, had always played a part in shaping society. This was her rightful place. Then the words came, words that were not for her, words that ripped through the carefully constructed fabric of her hopes and dreams, leaving them in tatters. "I am delighted to announce the engagement of the esteemed Lord Arthur Blackwood," the master of ceremonies proclaimed, his voice ringing through the hall, "to the exquisite Miss Isabella Sterling." The name hung in the perfumed air, a death knell to Eleanor's world. The sound seemed to stretch, echoing in her ears long after it had been spoken. Her fingers, still clutching the fragile china cup, went numb. The elegant ballroom, with its glittering chandeliers and polished floors, spun around her. The soft murmur of approval that rippled through the crowd was a deafening roar in her mind. Her breath hitched, trapped somewhere between her lungs and her throat. No, it could not be. This was a mistake, a cruel joke. She must have misheard. Her eyes flew to Arthur. He stood there, now looking directly at the dais, a faint, almost imperceptible smile gracing his lips. He did not look at her. He did not even glance in her direction. Isabella beside him beamed, a triumphant glow radiating from her hand now openly linked with Arthur's. Eleanor felt a cold, crushing weight descend upon her, pressing the air from her lungs. Her mind screamed in protest, denying the reality of the words. The sapphire ring on her finger, once a symbol of commitment, now felt like a brand, searing into her skin. The jasmine-scented air turned acrid, choking her. Every sound, every face, every glint of light in the ballroom coalesced into a single, horrifying truth. It was not her. It was never going to be her. Her dreams, her family's future, her very identity, all shattered into a million invisible pieces at the feet of a society that reveled in such cruel spectacles. She stood there, frozen, watching in horror as the master of ceremonies announced the engagement of Lord Arthur Blackwood to Miss Isabella Sterling, not to her. A collective gasp, thin and sharp, sliced through the gilded air of the Rothschild Grand Ballroom. It seemed to steal the breath from 100 guests, silencing the orchestra's last note. Eleanor felt it before understanding, a cold tremor running through her veins. Her heart, so recently light with anticipation, plummeted like a stone. The master of ceremonies, portly and beaming, announced the name. It was not hers. It was Miss Isabella Sterling. Eleanor's world, vibrantly colored by hope, fractured into 1,000 glittering shards. The opulent ballroom with its soaring ceilings began to swim before her eyes. Gaslights blurred into a hazy swirl of gold and white. A dizzying wave threatened to pull her under, chilling her. Blood drained from her face, leaving it cold and clammy, a stark contrast to the burning shame igniting within. Every muscle tensed, rigid with disbelief, as a profound stillness settled upon her. Then, slowly, the whispers began. They started as soft rustlings, like dry leaves growing into a low, pervasive hum. Eleanor did not need to hear the words themselves. She felt them. Sharp and insidious, they pierced her composure. The weight of countless eyes, like invisible hands, pressed against her, making breath a struggle. She felt their pity, their surprise, their barely disguised curiosity, a heavy blanket smothering her. Each glance felt like a physical blow. She stood frozen, a statue carved from ice. Her gaze, wide and unseeing, searched for Arthur. She found him standing beside Isabella, his posture stiff, his eyes deliberately averted. He would not meet her gaze, not even for a fleeting second. The man who had pledged his future, whose promises filled her nights, now stood before her a cold stranger. Isabella, however, did not share his reticence. A faint, almost imperceptible smile played on her lips. A glint of triumph in her pale blue eyes confirmed the depth of Eleanor's betrayal. It was a cruel final twist of the knife. A raw, jagged pain tore through Eleanor's chest. It was not just a broken engagement. It was the agony of public humiliation, her dignity stripped bare before society. Her throat tightened, a sudden fierce constriction stealing her breath. She swallowed hard, trying to push down the rising tide of despair. A small, involuntary sound escaped her lips, a choked sob, more gasp than cry. It was a sound of profound heartbreak, lost amidst the rising murmurs and distant, polite applause for the new couple. Her fingers, which had moments ago clutched the delicate fan, now trembled uncontrollably. The fan slipped from her grasp, clattering softly to the polished marble floor. The sound, small as it was, seemed to echo with the force of a thunderclap in her ears. It was the only tangible proof of her crumbling composure. This was the end of everything, she thought. A desolate, echoing truth. Her family's hopes, her own dreams, all shattered in a single devastating moment. The grand plans for Vance Manor, the future she envisioned with Arthur, dissolved into nothingness. A desperate, primal need to escape seized her. She had to flee, to put distance between herself and the judging eyes, the suffocating whispers, the unbearable weight of her shame. Turning abruptly, her silk gown rustling softly, she moved. It was not a walk, but a stumbling, disoriented rush through the labyrinthine crowd. The faces of the guests, a blur of startled expressions and curious glances, flashed past her. She saw Lady Finch's wide eyes, Lord Carrington's raised eyebrows, the knowing smirk of Miss Davenport. Each face was a fresh wound, each glance a renewed sting. The opulent surroundings of the ballroom, once a source of quiet pride, now transformed into a cruel, mocking kaleidoscope. Glittering chandeliers, which promised to light her path to happiness, seemed to mock her with their cold, indifferent brilliance. The vibrant colors of ladies' gowns, the rich fabrics of gentlemen's coats, swirled into an indistinct, painful blur. The scent of jasmine and expensive perfume, once intoxicating, now felt cloying and suffocating, clinging to her like a shroud. She tasted the metallic tang of fear in her mouth, mingling with the bitter taste of betrayal. She pushed past a cluster of ladies, their conversation abruptly ceasing as she passed. A gentleman's hand brushed her arm, and she flinched away as if burned. Every touch felt like an invasion, a violation of her shattered privacy. Her vision narrowed, tunnel-like, focusing only on the exit, a distant, beckoning rectangle of darkness. Her breath came in ragged gasps, each one a struggle against the tightening band around her chest. The orchestra, which had resumed a soft, melancholic waltz, faded behind her. It was replaced by the pounding rhythm of her own heart. The long corridor leading away from the ballroom stretched before her, dim and silent. Thick velvet curtains blocked out the world, plunging the hallway into a muted twilight. She stumbled, her heel catching on the plush carpet, but caught herself. Driven by fierce, desperate urgency, she pressed on. Her hands fumbled blindly for the heavy oak doors that led to the outside. Her chest heaved, aching with the effort of holding back the torrent of tears that threatened to overwhelm her. She could not break down here, not yet, not within these walls. Finally, with a desperate surge of strength, she pushed open one of the massive doors. A blast of cold, sharp air struck her face, a welcome shock after the stifling heat. The scent of damp earth and the distant murmur of the city night replaced the cloying perfumes. She stepped out onto the sweeping steps of the Rothschild estate. The heavy door thudded shut behind her, severing her connection to the world she had left. The sudden silence was profound, broken only by the distant clip-clop of a carriage and the rustle of leaves. The night sky stretched above her, a vast, indifferent expanse dotted with cold, distant stars. No moon offered its gentle light, only a sliver of silver hinted at its presence behind clouds. Eleanor stood at the top of the steps, her shoulders hunched against the biting chill. It seemed to penetrate her thin silk gown, seeping into her bones. Her carefully styled auburn hair, disheveled from her frantic escape, whipped around her face in the sudden breeze. The tears, held back for so long by sheer force of will, now came in a torrent. They streamed down her cheeks, hot then cold, blurring her vision further. Each tear was a testament to a broken promise, a shattered dream, a lost future. She tasted the salt on her lips, a bitter counterpoint to the sweetness of the hope she had carried just moments before. Her body shook with silent, wrenching sobs, each one a release of the overwhelming pain that consumed her. She buried her face in her trembling hands, not caring who might see her, not caring about anything but the profound ache within her soul. She was utterly alone. The carriages of the other guests were lined up in the distance, their coachmen standing patiently by, but none waited for her. Her own carriage, she realized with a fresh wave of despair, had likely already departed. It had delivered her to this evening of ruin. She was stranded, adrift in the vast, uncaring night, with no direction, no destination, and no one to turn to. The elegant streets of the city, usually a comforting sight, now stretched out before her, dark and intimidating, reflecting her own internal emptiness. With a heavy heart, she began to descend the steps. Her silk slippers were barely audible against the stone. Each step was an effort, her legs feeling like lead. She stumbled slightly on the uneven gravel path leading to the road. The cold pavement bit through her thin shoes, but she barely registered the discomfort. Her mind was a whirlwind of agonizing thoughts, replaying Arthur's betrayal, the triumphant glint in Isabella's eyes, the crushing weight of public shame. She felt a profound sense of loss, a void where her future had once been. She reached the edge of the road, gas lamps casting long, flickering shadows. Her eyes, red-rimmed and swollen, scanned the empty street, a desperate plea for a passing hackney. But the street was deserted, as empty as her heart. She wrapped her arms around herself, a futile attempt to ward off the encroaching cold and the gnawing despair. The night seemed to stretch out endlessly before her, a vast, black canvas upon which her sorrow was painted in stark, agonizing detail. Just as the last vestiges of hope threatened to leave her, a voice, low and resonant, cut through the stillness of the night. It came from the deep shadows cast by a towering oak tree near the estate gates. The unexpected sound made Eleanor jump, her heart leaping into her throat. She spun around, her tear-filled eyes straining to see into the darkness. The voice was unfamiliar, yet it carried an undeniable authority, a quiet strength that pierced through her haze of grief. She stood trembling, utterly alone and adrift in her despair, her tears still streaming down her face, as the voice spoke again. The cold night air bit at Eleanor's exposed skin, a harsh contrast to the suffocating warmth of the ballroom she had just fled. Each breath hitched, tasting of salt and despair. The gas lamps lining the street cast long, wavering shadows, making the familiar world seem alien and menacing. She clutched her thin shawl tighter, the worn fabric offering little comfort against the chill that seeped into her very bones. Her vision blurred with unshed tears, but she strained to see a passing carriage, any carriage, to carry her away from the nightmare. A distant clatter of hooves on cobblestones offered a momentary flicker of hope. She lifted a trembling hand, ready to flag down the vehicle. But before she could utter a sound, a deeper shadow detached itself from the wall beside her, solidifying into a figure that blocked her path. Eleanor gasped, her heart leaping into her throat. Fear, raw and primal, coiled in her stomach. Who was this man emerging from the darkness like a specter? He stood tall, a formidable silhouette against the flickering gaslight. His clothing was dark, impeccably tailored, and seemed to absorb the light around him. There was an aura of quiet power, almost predatory, that made her instinctively recoil. She could not clearly discern his features in the dimness, only the impression of a strong jaw and eyes that seemed to hold the night's secrets. A faint scent of leather and something subtly metallic, like cold iron, reached her. A voice, low and resonant, cut through the clamor of her panic. It was a voice that commanded attention without needing to raise its volume, each word carefully articulated. Lady Eleanor Vance, I presume. Eleanor froze. How did he know her name? Her mind, already reeling from the evening's betrayal, struggled to comprehend this new intrusion. She stumbled back a step, her hand flying instinctively to her throat. The man took a step closer, and a gloved hand extended toward her, almost an offering, yet also a subtle barrier. Forgive my abruptness, he continued, his tone devoid of apology, yet not unkind. I am Lord Alaric Thorne. Alaric Thorne. The name was whispered in hushed tones across the city's drawing rooms, a man of immense wealth and even greater mystery. He was rarely seen in society, preferring the shadows of industry and finance. Eleanor had only ever heard tales, never imagining she would encounter him, let alone in such a desolate, humiliating moment. His reputation was as formidable as his presence. My carriage awaits, he said, gesturing with a slight tilt of his head towards a sleek, dark vehicle that had materialized silently from further down the street. It was a private carriage, not a hired one, its horses standing still, their breath pluming in the cold air. Allow me to offer you safe passage, Lady Eleanor. Eleanor stared at the carriage, then back at the man. His eyes, now a discernible stormy gray in the faint light, seemed to pierce through her, seeing beyond her tear-stained face to the raw wound within. She felt a flush of anger, a surge of pride that fought against the despair. How dared he witness her in such a state? How dared he offer charity? Her chin lifted fractionally. I do not require your charity, Lord Thorne, she managed, her voice a reedy whisper, far from the dignified retort she intended. She hated the tremor in her words. She hated her weakness. The taste of salt was still on her tongue, mingling with the bitterness of her humiliation. A ghost of a smile, cold and knowing, touched his lips. It is not charity I offer, Lady Eleanor. He paused, allowing his words to settle in the tense air between them. The distant music of the ballroom, once a painful reminder, now seemed to mock her with its superficial gaiety. It is an opportunity. His gaze never wavered, a steady, unnerving presence. Eleanor felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. This man was not merely offering a ride. He was offering something far more profound and far more unsettling. The thought of stepping into his carriage, into his world, sent a fresh wave of apprehension through her. What could such a man possibly want with her? An opportunity, she echoed, her voice barely audible above the rhythmic clatter of another passing carriage. Her mind struggled to grasp his meaning, to reconcile this unexpected intervention with the devastating reality of her night. The scent of damp earth hung heavy in the air, grounding her slightly even as his words threatened to lift her into an unknown realm. Lord Thorne's voice dropped to an even lower register, almost a murmur, yet it carried an undeniable weight. It seemed to cut through the noise of the city, reaching directly into her fractured spirit. Lady Eleanor, I have a proposition that could mend your broken fortunes and perhaps your broken spirit. The words struck her with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. Broken fortunes. Broken spirit. He saw her, truly saw her, in a way Arthur never had, in a way no one else in that glittering ballroom had bothered to. The raw, aching truth of his statement resonated deep within her, a chilling validation of her most private fears. Her heart pounded, a frantic drum against her ribs. She felt exposed, vulnerable. Yet a strange, almost desperate curiosity began to stir within her. A tear, cold and unwelcome, tracked a path down her cheek. The shame of being seen in such a state, of having her deepest vulnerabilities laid bare by a stranger, burned. Yet beneath the humiliation, a tiny defiant spark ignited. How could he know so much? And why would he care? Her pride screamed at her to refuse, to turn and flee into the anonymity of the night, even if it meant walking all the way back to Vance Manor. But the image of Vance Manor with its fading tapestries and its creaking floors flashed in her mind. The reality of her family's impending ruin, the desperate search for a solution that had consumed her for months, pressed down on her with suffocating force. Arthur's betrayal had not just broken her heart, it had shattered any hope of securing her family's future. Alaric Thorne waited, a statue of dark resolve, his gaze fixed on her. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken questions and profound implications. She could feel the lingering warmth of the boss lamp on her face, a stark contrast to the cold dread settling in her stomach. He offered no further explanation, no persuasion, simply the stark, undeniable truth of his observation and the audacious promise of his offer. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps. The choice, sudden and terrifying, lay before her. Clinging to her pride meant clinging to ruin, to the slow, agonizing decay of everything she held dear. Accepting his offer, however cryptic and unnerving, might be a path to salvation. But what kind of salvation? And at what cost? Eleanor's fingers, numb with cold and emotion, tightened around her shawl until her knuckles ached. She looked from the dark, imposing figure of Alaric Thorne to the open door of his silent carriage, an abyss of unknowns. The scent of his subtle cologne, expensive and distinct, wafted towards her, a tangible link to this mysterious man. Her head spun with the weight of her despair, battling the faint, dangerous whisper of hope. The decision felt monumental, a hinge point in her shattered life. She stood there, poised on the edge of two worlds, the one she had lost and the one that now beckoned with an unsettling promise. Her gaze darted between his unreadable face and the dark interior of the carriage. Her heart hammered, an erratic rhythm of fear and a strange, desperate yearning for escape. Eleanor, stunned and disoriented, found herself hesitating at the open carriage door, torn between her pride and the sheer desperation of her situation. Eleanor's breath hitched. The cold night air bit, but Lord Thorne's low voice from the shadows was a deeper shock. His words, a peculiar mix of command and unsettling compassion, offered a proposition. It spoke to her broken fortunes, to her spirit. Her mind reeled from the ballroom's cruel spectacle. Humiliation burned her cheeks as this stranger spoke of her ruin plainly. How dare he? How dare anyone witness her downfall and then speak of it so openly? Lord Thorne, she managed, her voice thin. She clutched her worn cloak, her fingers locking onto her reticule. I do not know you. The words felt small, a child's protest. He stepped into the gas lamp's faint glow. His dark coat made him seem formidable. His stormy eyes fixed on her, unwavering. They looked through her, she felt, to her desperate core. My name is Alaric Thorne, he replied, his voice calm. Lady Eleanor, I know more of your circumstances than you might believe. He gestured to the open carriage door, its dark interior a silent invitation. A tremor ran through her. How could he know? Her family's debts, the tightening noose around Vance Manor, were fiercely guarded secrets. Only Arthur, her faithless fiancé, knew their predicament. He had used it as a cruel weapon. A bitter taste filled her mouth, thinking of his betrayal. My circumstances are my own, Eleanor retorted, a fragile defiance igniting. She lifted her chin, reclaiming some Vance pride. I require no assistance from a stranger, Lord Thorne. The lie felt hollow. She desperately needed help, but her pride, a shield, refused to shatter. Alaric Thorne observed her, a ghost of a smile on his lips. It was a quiet acknowledgement of her struggle. He did not press, just shifted his weight, utterly patient. The silence stretched, broken only by a distant carriage and dripping water. The cold seeped into her bones, making her shiver. Her feet ached in thin slippers. She longed for Vance Manor, yet returning to its empty halls to face her family with this fresh wound filled her with dread. Lady Eleanor, Alaric said, cutting through her thoughts. Vance Manor faces foreclosure within the fortnight. The debts from your late father are considerable. Your mother's pawned jewels will not cover a fraction of the sum. The air left Eleanor's lungs. A heavy stone settled in her chest, crushing resistance. Her facade crumbled. He knew everything. The depth of his knowledge was terrifying. Her gaze dropped. The world swayed. How do you know this? She whispered. A cold tear traced her cheek. The public humiliation, the private shame of their poverty, her impending ruin, all laid bare. Information, Lady Eleanor, is a commodity, Alaric replied. I have a talent for acquiring it. He paused. Arthur Blackwood understood your family's precarious position. It was, I believe, part of his calculation. Arthur's name sent a fresh pang, his cold ambition, a brutal reminder. He had not loved her, merely seen an opportunity. When a wealthier match appeared, he discarded her with cruelty. Bitterness filled her throat. He would never have allowed Vance Manor to fall, Eleanor choked, a futile defense of the man who betrayed her. It was a lie, a thread of comfort she clung to, wanting to believe he had some honor. Alaric sighed. Perhaps not, he conceded, but his new fiancée, Miss Sterling, brings a dowry far surpassing any connection to a struggling, aristocratic name. Her family's influence in Parliament is considerable. His words painted a stark picture of Arthur's motives. Despair washed over Eleanor. Not just her heart, but her family's future, hung in the balance. Her mother, Clara, their home. The weight pressed down, an unbearable burden. Her pride, her only defense, felt like a cracking shell. She had no money, no connections, no fiancé. Her options dwindled to nothing. A shiver racked her body from cold and terror. She imagined bailiffs at Vance Manor, stripping away generations of memories. The thought was unbearable. A sharp pain. "What is your proposition, Lord Thorne?" she whispered, her voice stripped of defiance. The words tasted like ash, each syllable a surrender. A profound weariness settled over her. Alaric's expression remained unreadable, his gaze steady. He let her question linger, assessing her surrender. The metallic tang of night air intensified. "A partnership, Lady Eleanor," he finally stated, his voice low with steel. "An arrangement benefiting us both. I require social graces, a veneer of respectability my background cannot easily acquire. You, I believe, require financial security and a swift return to influence." Eleanor's brow furrowed. "Social graces?" she repeated, confusion overriding despair. What did a man of his wealth need with her, a ruined noblewoman? She believed she had nothing left. "Society, Lady Eleanor, is a fickle mistress," Alaric explained. "It values lineage, tradition, an unblemished reputation, qualities you possess despite your setback. I am merely a man of business, forged in industry." He paused, eyes still fixed on her. "My name lacks old-world polish. A partnership with a Lady Vance would provide that. It would open doors my fortune cannot always pry ajar." Eleanor listened, processing his words. He asked her to be a facade for his ambition, in exchange for saving her family. The idea was demeaning. The alternative was unthinkable. Vance Manor lost, her mother and Clara destitute. The choice was stark. She closed her eyes, dizziness washing over her. She saw ancestors in Vance Manor portraits. Could she be the one to let their legacy crumble? Responsibility settled on her shoulders. When she opened her eyes, Alaric Thorne was still there. The gas lamp flickered, casting mocking shadows. The air felt heavy. Her chest ached, holding back a sob. Tears pricked her eyelids. "And what would this partnership entail?" she asked, her voice raspy above the city's rumble. She hated the desperation in her words, the surrender. She was cornered, trapped. Alaric nodded. "Details would be discussed later, Lady Eleanor. It would secure your family's future, restore Vance Manor, and provide for your needs. In return, you would lend your name, your presence, and your charm to my affairs." Considerable charm. The words felt like a mockery. She was humiliated, heartbroken, shivering. Yet he spoke with certainty. He saw something she could no longer perceive. A fierce determination stirred within her, displacing despair. If she was a pawn, she would be the best. If she sold her name to save her family, she would do it with her head high. Vance's pride was wounded, not broken. It would adapt. She looked at the carriage, and then at Alaric Thorne. His face was still, his eyes revealing nothing. He was a man of power, of mystery, and now her only hope. The silence grew heavy, broken by nervous horse's breath misting in the cold. "I accept your invitation into your carriage, Lord Thorne," Eleanor finally said, her voice stronger, though trembling. It was not a full acceptance yet, but a first step into his world, a pragmatic decision born of necessity. A flicker, perhaps of approval, crossed Alaric's eyes. He offered his gloved hand, strong and steady, an impersonal gesture devoid of warmth but offering stability. She hesitated, her hand clutching her reticule, feeling small. Then, with a resolve she did not know, Eleanor placed her cold hand into his. His grip was firm, gently guiding her to the carriage door. She felt subtle warmth from his hand, a strange comfort. She stepped inside, the plush leather yielding. The carriage interior was spacious, dimly lit by a lantern. It smelled faintly of leather and something masculine. Alaric followed, settling onto the opposite seat. The carriage shrank around them, the space intimate, charged with tension. He did not speak, merely watched her, his stormy eyes reflecting the lantern's flicker. The door closed with a soft click, sealing her into this new reality. The sound was loud in the quiet, a final mark on her old life's ruin. She was no longer cold, but not safe. The carriage lurched, then began to move. Horses' hooves clattered softly, echoing her frantic heart. City lights receded, blurring. Eleanor sat still, hands clasped, gaze fixed on the man opposite. Lord Alaric Thorne, her new terrifying benefactor. the man who held her family's fate. He sat equally still, his silhouette dark against the window. He was an enigma, a puzzle she confronted. The silence was profound, thick with unspoken questions, with her desperation and his inscrutable intentions. What had she agreed to? What did he want? What would become of Lady Eleanor Vance? The carriage wheels hummed a low, hypnotic tune against the cobbled street, a sound that seemed to pull Eleanor further away from everything familiar. She sat opposite Lord Thorne, his presence a dark, imposing silhouette in the dim light filtering through the windows. The air inside the carriage carried the subtle, expensive scent of leather and his unique cologne, a sophisticated blend that spoke of distant lands and quiet power. Eleanor could feel the steady beat of her own pulse against her temples, a frantic rhythm that echoed the chaos in her mind. Her fingers locked around the worn fabric of her gown, the silk a cool, fragile comfort against her trembling skin. He broke the silence with a voice that was a low, resonant rumble, a sound that seemed to settle in the bare bones of the carriage. "Lady Eleanor," he began, his gaze steady, unwavering, "your family's name will be restored, their future secured." His words were not a question, but a quiet, absolute statement of fact. Eleanor felt a tremor pass through her, a mix of desperate hope and profound unease. She had not asked how or why or what the price might be. He simply offered the solution, a lifeline thrown into her sea of despair. "My terms are simple," he continued, his tone devoid of any emotion she could readily identify. "And when you are ready, you will hear them." He offered no further elaboration, no tempting details to sway her. It was a stark declaration, a challenge issued in the velvet darkness of the carriage. Eleanor swallowed, her throat suddenly dry, the taste of salt from her earlier tears still lingering on her lips. She could see nothing but the deep shadows playing across his face, obscuring his expression, making him seem even more remote and formidable. A chill snaked its way up her spine, not from the night air, but from the chilling certainty in his voice. The carriage eventually slowed, then stopped, pulling Eleanor from her daze. She blinked, the sudden silence of the halted vehicle almost as jarring as its motion had been. A footman opened the door, and the cold night air rushed in, carrying the damp scent of earth and dying leaves. Thorne offered her no assistance, merely a slight inclination of his head, a gesture of dismissal that spoke volumes. She stepped out into the familiar, cracked flagstones of Vance Manor, the contrast between the plush warmth of his carriage and the stark reality of her home, a brutal slap. The manor loomed before her, a hulking shadow against the bruised purples of the pre-dawn sky. Its once grand facade, now chipped and stained, seemed to sag with weariness. The scent of jasmine and expensive perfume that had filled the ballroom felt a lifetime away, replaced by the familiar, comforting, yet heartbreaking aroma of old wood and dust. Eleanor walked through the silent halls, each creaking floorboard under her slippered feet, a lament for faded glory. The portraits on the walls, her ancestors, stared down with solemn, accusing eyes, their painted gazes seeming to demand that she uphold their legacy. She traced a finger over the ornate but tarnished frame of her great-grandmother, a woman whose eyes held a familiar, fierce pride. Her room was cold, the fire in the hearth long since extinguished. She moved to the window, pulling aside the heavy velvet drapes that felt rough and thin beneath her fingertips. The garden outside was a tangle of overgrown roses and neglected shrubs, a mirror to the disarray in her soul. A sliver of moon, sharp and cold, hung in the sky, casting long, spectral shadows across the lawn. Eleanor shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. But the cold that penetrated her was not merely from the unheated room. It was the chill of utter desolation. She sank onto her bed, the mattress lumpy and familiar, a contrast to the soft, silken luxury she imagined Alaric Thorne enjoyed. Her mind replayed the night's horrors, the master of ceremonies' booming voice, Arthur's calculated smirk, Isabella's triumphant gaze, the whispers like daggers, and the hundreds of eyes fixed upon her. Each memory was a fresh wound, tearing at the fragile remnants of her dignity. The engagement ring, a modest sapphire family heirloom that Arthur had so carelessly presented, now felt like a brand of shame. Its weight, or rather, its absence, was a void on her finger. Sleep became an impossible luxury. Eleanor paced the worn carpet of her room, the silence of the manor pressing in on her, broken only by the occasional creak of the ancient house. Her thoughts spun in a dizzying vortex. To accept Alaric's offer meant plunging into the unknown, aligning herself with a man whose motives were as opaque as the midnight sky. It meant surrendering a part of herself, her independence, perhaps even her future, to his control. Her pride screamed in protest, a visceral refusal to be bought, to be a pawn in another man's game, especially after Arthur's betrayal. Yet, as the hours crawled by, a different, more powerful voice began to assert itself. She pictured her father, his shoulders bowed by the weight of their debts, his once hearty laugh now a rare, strained sound. She saw her mother, her hands constantly busy, trying to mend and make do, her eyes often clouded with unspoken worry. Their faces swam before her, clear and vivid, pushing back the veil of her own humiliation. It was not just her future at stake, but theirs. The Vance name, which Alaric had so casually mentioned, was more than just a label. It was the sum of their history, their dwindling honor. The arguments raged within her, a furious battle between what she wanted for herself and what she owed to her family. Could she truly let them sink into utter ruin simply to preserve her wounded pride? The thought was a bitter draught, a betrayal far deeper than Arthur's. His betrayal had been personal, a blow to her heart. To abandon her family, however, would be a blow to her very soul. She remembered Alaric's unsettling knowledge of her circumstances, his calm assurance. He knew their plight. He understood the desperate game she was in. She paused before the cold hearth, staring into the ashes of a fire long dead. A profound ache settled in her chest, a hollow, echoing chamber where her dreams had once resided. The image of Arthur and Isabella, radiant and smug, flashed in her mind, a cruel reminder of her public downfall. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to banish their faces, to focus instead on the quiet strength she knew she possessed, a strength that had been forged in the crucible of their financial struggles. This was not about revenge, not yet. This was about survival. As the first faint blush of dawn touched the horizon, painting the sky in soft mauves and grays, a strange clarity settled over Eleanor. The agonizing indecision, the furious internal debate, began to dissipate. A cold, hard resolve took its place. Her pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Her personal pain, however deep, was secondary to the needs of her family. She had to act, not out of despair, but out of a fierce, protective love. Whatever Alaric Thorne's terms might be, she would meet them. She would face him, not as a broken woman, but as one who had chosen her path with open eyes. The room began to brighten, the shadows retreating from the corners, revealing the familiar contours of her furniture, the faded patterns on the wallpaper. The world was waking, and with it, a new, determined Eleanor. She stood, her body stiff from the sleepless night, but her mind now clear, focused. There was no joy in this decision, no sense of triumph, only a grim, unwavering resolve. She would protect her family, no matter the cost to herself. She would step into the unknown, armed only with her courage and the weight of her responsibilities. Moving with purpose, Eleanor went to the small writing desk in the corner of her room. The inkwell held a small reservoir of black liquid, and she dipped a fresh quill, its feathers soft against her fingers. The paper, a thick cream stock, felt smooth beneath her hand. Her penmanship, usually delicate and flowing, was now firm, almost rigid. She wrote a short message, her hand steady, each stroke deliberate. It was a simple acceptance, a brief acknowledgement of his offer. She did not ask for details, nor did she express any emotion beyond the stark agreement. She folded the note precisely, her movements precise and unhurried. A small wax seal bearing the crest of Vance Manor was pressed into the hot wax, its impression clear and sharp. Then, with a breath she had not realized she was holding, she summoned a young footman, instructing him to deliver the message directly to Lord Thorne's residence. As the boy nodded and departed, Eleanor watched him go, the small slip of paper sealing her fate. She had stepped onto a path unknown, a journey whose destination was shrouded in Alaric Thorne's enigmatic shadow. Gravel crunched under carriage wheels, sharp in the hushed morning. Eleanor sat stiffly, her worn silk gown threadbare against plush velvet. Thorn House loomed, a dark stone edifice with watchful windows. She imagined Vance's ancestors disapproving of its cold, imposing presence. A silent footman opened the door. Eleanor stepped onto smooth cobblestones, chill seeping through her slippers. The air held damp earth in an expensive remoteness, unlike Vance Manor's familiar dust and lavender. A tall, austere woman with hair in a severe bun met her. Her expression was neutral, but Eleanor felt scrutinized, weighed, and found wanting. "Lady Eleanor," the woman said, her voice crisp as starched linen, "I am Mrs. Davies, Lord Thorne's housekeeper. Welcome to Thorne House." The words were polite but held no warmth. Eleanor's throat tightened. She nodded, unable to speak, her gaze sweeping the vast, dimly lit foyer. Stark opulence met her, rich dark wood and intricate carvings hinting at immense wealth and meticulous order. No frills softened its powerful presence. Her trunk, holding meager possessions, was already being carried in. Shame flushed through her, remembering her faded gowns and worn slippers. This house was a world apart from her own. She followed Mrs. Davies up a sweeping staircase. Her footsteps echoed on marble, amplified in the profound quiet. Her new room was immense, larger than Vance Manor's entire drawing room. Heavy velvet curtains framed tall windows, overlooking a manicured garden, still shrouded in mist. A fire crackled gently in the hearth, casting warm, flickering light across a four-poster bed draped in rich, dark fabrics. Mrs. Davies gestured vaguely. "Lord Thorne will see you in the study after you have refreshed yourself. He requests your presence in 1 hour." The housekeeper departed, leaving Eleanor alone in the grand, silent chamber. The silence pressed in, a physical weight. She walked to the window, her hand on the cool glass. Her reflection stared back, pale and bewildered, a ghost in this opulent cage. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was here. She had accepted. Now came the reckoning, the precise terms of her surrender. An hour later, her spine stiffened with desperation. Eleanor stood before Alaric Thorne's study doors. A soft knock, a quiet command to enter, and she stepped into a room filled with leather and old books. Alaric Thorne stood by a large window, his back to her, looking out at the city below. He wore a dark, impeccably tailored suit that seemed to absorb the light. Silence stretched, thick with expectation. Eleanor clasped her hands, knuckles white. She felt his presence, powerful and watchful, even unseen. He turned. His stormy eyes swept over her, missing nothing, and Eleanor felt a tremor. "Lady Eleanor," he said, low and resonant, sending a shiver down her spine. "Please sit." He gestured to a high-backed leather chair. Eleanor sat, back straight, gaze fixed on him. He settled into his own chair, leaning back, hands clasped. The faint scar near his temple seemed more pronounced in the dim light. "You accepted my proposition," he began, his voice devoid of emotion. "Now we must define its terms." He paused, letting his words settle. "My family has immense wealth, but lacks the social standing society still demands. Your family, the Vances, possesses an ancient name, a history that commands respect, but lacks the resources to maintain it." Eleanor flinched. The bluntness cut deep. It was true, painfully so, yet hearing it spoken felt like a fresh wound. He observed her reaction, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "My proposal," Alaric continued, "is a strategic alliance. You will be seen as my fiancée and later my wife. In exchange, I will ensure the financial security of the Vance estate, settle all outstanding debts, and provide you with a life of comfort and influence." Eleanor's breath caught. Fiancé. Wife. The word struck her, direct and startling. She had anticipated patronage, not this. A deep flush crept up her neck. "A marriage of convenience," he clarified, as if reading her stunned thoughts. "It will be a partnership, Lady Eleanor. You will bring your name, your grace, your understanding of the social world. I will bring my resources, my connections, my protection." His gaze was unwavering, piercing. "You will reside here, at Thorne House. You will be presented to society as my intended. Your every need will be met. In return, you will uphold the appearance of a devoted partner." Eleanor swallowed hard. "And what of affection?" she managed, her voice a bare whisper. The question felt foolish, almost childish, given his pragmatic proposal. Alaric's lips curved into a faint, imperceptible smile, devoid of mirth. Affection, Lady Eleanor, is a luxury we may or may not discover. It is not a requirement of this arrangement. Respect, discretion, and loyalty, however, are absolute necessities. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a low, intense tone. Understand this. My world is not one of polite drawing rooms and idle gossip alone. It is built on power, on reputation, on the careful calibration of influence. Your presence by my side will elevate both our positions. You will be protected from further humiliation. Your family will be safe. But you will also be under my command in matters both public and private concerning our union. Eleanor felt a chill spread. Under his command, it was a stark reality. She would trade one gilded cage for another, perhaps grander, but a cage nonetheless. Yet the image of Vance Manor, its fading grandeur, her mother's tired eyes, her younger sister's innocent hopes, flashed before her. She had chosen this path. There was no turning back. I understand, she said, her voice steadier than she expected. I accept your terms, Lord Thorne. A brief, almost imperceptible nod acknowledged her words. Good, he said, his eyes still holding hers. We begin immediately. He clapped his hands once and Mrs. Davies appeared. Mrs. Davies will see to your needs. A new wardrobe will be commissioned, suitable for your new station. You will be educated on certain aspects of my affairs, and you will learn to navigate the complexities of my world. He rose, signaling the end. Eleanor rose with him, feeling an odd mixture of apprehension and cold resolve. She was no longer just Lady Eleanor Vance. She was to be Lord Thorne's intended, a pawn in a game she barely understood. The next few days blurred into a whirlwind, a stark contrast to Vance Manor's quiet decay. Seamstresses arrived, a flurry of rustling silks and precise measurements. Eleanor stood for hours, pins pricking her skin, as exquisite fabrics draped her. Rich velvets, shimmering satins, delicate laces were a world away from her carefully mended gowns. Each new dress, each perfectly fitted corset, felt like another layer of armor, or a link in her golden chain. She saw herself in the large mirrors, a stranger looking back. Her auburn hair, once simply styled, was now artfully arranged by a skilled maid, adorned with pearls and delicate combs. Her pale features, once etched with worry, now appeared serene, almost regal, enhanced by subtle cosmetics. She felt pampered, yet unsettled. The luxury was breathtaking, but every stitch, every jewel symbolized her new ownership. Alaric often observed her during these transformations. He would appear in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame, a book in hand, his eyes following her movements. He rarely spoke, but his gaze was a tangible presence, warm yet chilling, always assessing. His scrutiny pricked her skin. She straightened, chin lifting, learning to perform the woman he envisioned even in private. One afternoon, new books arrived in her room. Not the romantic novels or poetry she favored, but volumes on economics, international trade, and Europe's political landscape. A note, penned in Alaric's bold, angular hand, accompanied them. Knowledge is power, Lady Eleanor. Your understanding of my world will be invaluable. Eleanor picked up a thick tome on banking, feeling a strange surge of curiosity. He was not merely dressing her up. He expected her to engage, to participate. The days continued with a rigorous schedule. Lessons in etiquette, household management, conversing with influential figures. Eleanor, despite initial apprehension, absorbed the information with surprising eagerness. She had always been intelligent, but opportunities had been limited by her family's declining fortunes. Now, a vast library of knowledge opened before her, under Alaric's watchful, unspoken guidance. One evening, as she sat in the grand dining room, a silent servant pouring wine, Alaric spoke. You adapt quickly, Eleanor. He used her given name for the first time, startling her. It felt intimate, a breach in their carefully constructed formality. Her heart gave a little lurch. She looked up, meeting his gaze across the polished mahogany table. I must, she replied, her voice soft. My family depends on it. He nodded slowly, a hint of approval in his eyes. Indeed, and you understand the importance of appearances? Eleanor thought of Arthur, of Isabella, of the whispers at the ballroom. "I do," she affirmed, a bitter taste in her mouth. "The world sees what it wishes to see. We merely provide the illusion." Alaric's lips curved again, a fleeting, imperceptible smile that did not quite reach his eyes. Precisely. There were moments when his intensity felt overwhelming, when his silent observation made her feel like an exotic specimen under a microscope. Yet there were also fleeting glimpses of something else, a subtle concern, a quiet understanding. He had seen her at her lowest, broken and humiliated. He knew her desperation. This shared history, this unspoken agreement of vulnerability, created a strange, fragile bond between them. She was his captive, yes, but also, in a way, his confidant. The initial fear of him, of his power and enigmatic nature, began to intertwine with a budding curiosity. Who was Alaric Thorne, this man who commanded fortunes and societal tides, yet remained so utterly detached? What drove him? What lay beneath the formidable businessman's facade? She studied him, just as he studied her, trying to decipher the unspoken language of his eyes, the subtle shifts in his demeanor. It was a dangerous game, this silent dance of observation, but Eleanor could not resist. Then came the announcement, their first public appearance, a grand ball hosted by Lady Ashworth, a formidable matriarch of society. Eleanor stood before the cheval mirror, a vision in a midnight blue silk gown, intricately embroidered with silver threads that shimmered like starlight. Diamonds sparkled at her throat, a gift from Alaric, their brilliance almost painful to behold. Her reflection was breathtaking yet unfamiliar. No longer the girl in faded gowns, she was a woman of consequence, adorned in wealth and new purpose. A deep breath steadied her trembling hands. The thought of facing society, of facing Arthur, twisted her stomach into knots. But then she remembered her family, the promise she had made. She was doing this for them. She squared her shoulders, her chin lifting slightly. This was her stage, and she would play her part. Alaric waited for her at the foot of the grand staircase, a tall, dark silhouette against the foyer's golden glow. He looked up as she began her descent, his eyes meeting hers. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. His gaze was intense, analytical, holding a fleeting spark she could not decipher, perhaps approval or a possessive pride. He extended his arm, a gesture of quiet command and unwavering support. Eleanor placed her hand in the crook of his elbow. His touch was firm, reassuring. She felt a jolt, an unexpected warmth spreading through her arm. Together they stepped out into the crisp night, into the waiting carriage, into the dazzling, unforgiving glare of society. Gasps were almost audible as they entered the Ashworth ballroom. Whispers rippled through the glittering crowd, like a sudden breeze through dry leaves. All eyes turned to them, to Eleanor, transformed and radiant, on the arm of the city's most mysterious and powerful man. The air crackled with surprise, speculation, and a dawning grudging respect. Eleanor felt a surge of defiant power. She was no longer a victim. She was Alaric Thorne's intended, and the world would now see her anew. The Rothschild Grand Ballroom hummed with 1,000 tiny conversations, each one a sharp dart aimed at Eleanor. She stood by Alaric Thorne, the air thick with jasmine, and the subtle metallic scent of polished brass. The chandeliers above scattered diamond light across the marble floor, reflecting the faces of the curious, the scandalized, and the openly disapproving. Eleanor felt the weight of every gaze, a palpable pressure against her skin, yet she held her head high. Her new gown, a deep emerald silk, felt like a second skin, a protective shell Alaric had provided. Its richness was a stark contrast to the faded elegance of her past, a silent declaration of her altered circumstances. She focused on the distant notes of a waltz, letting the music wash over her, a distraction from the whispers that followed her like shadows. "Is that truly Lady Eleanor?" one voice carried, thin and sharp. "After all that happened?" Another added, laced with disbelief. Eleanor imagined the questions forming on their lips, each one a tiny barb. She gripped the delicate fan in her hand, the ivory cool against her palm, a small anchor in the swirling current of judgment. Her breath came in an even rhythm, a quiet defiance against the tumult within. She remembered her father's words. "Hold your chin and garbage center, Let them see only strength, never fear. Tonight those words were her shield. Alaric Thorne stood beside her, a formidable presence. He did not speak, but his stillness spoke volumes. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, scanned the room with an almost predatory calm, missing nothing. She felt the subtle shift of his body, the way he subtly angled himself, a silent sentinel warding off the most direct assaults. His presence was a bulwark, a quiet declaration that she was no longer alone, no longer vulnerable. He had given her this new armor, this unexpected platform, and she felt a strange flicker of gratitude, an emotion that complicated the purely transactional nature of their arrangement. A woman with too many jewels, her voice cloying like overripe fruit, approached them. Lady Eleanor, what a surprise to see you. We had heard you were unwell. Her smile did not reach her eyes. Eleanor's fingers tightened on the fan. The woman's gaze lingered on Alaric, an unspoken question in her assessing glance. Eleanor met the woman's stare with a cool, steady gaze. Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Dalton. I am perfectly well, as you can see. Her voice, steady and clear, held no tremor, no hint of the raw hurt that still throbbed beneath her carefully constructed composure. She felt Alaric's presence like a warm cloak, a silent endorsement of her response. Mrs. Dalton's smile faltered, her painted lips twitching. She seemed to search for another weakness, another crack in Eleanor's facade, but found none. The air around them grew momentarily taut. Then Mrs. Dalton, clearly uncomfortable, offered a curt nod and retreated, her silk gown rustling like dry leaves. Eleanor let out a slow, silent breath. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. The scent of Mrs. Dalton's heavy lilac perfume lingered, momentarily clashing with the ballroom's sweeter notes. You handled that with admirable grace, Alaric's low voice murmured, a quiet current against the background hum. It was the first time he had spoken since they entered, and the unexpected compliment sent a peculiar warmth through Eleanor. She glanced at him, his profile sharp and unyielding in the soft light. A faint, almost imperceptible curve touched the corner of his lips. She felt a strange flutter in her chest, a reaction she tried to dismiss as mere surprise. One learns quickly in these rooms, Lord Thorne, Eleanor replied, her voice soft but firm, or one is consumed. She thought of the tears she had shed, the humiliation that had scorched her soul only weeks ago. The memory was still sharp, a raw wound, but it no longer held the power to paralyze her. She was here, standing tall, and that was enough for now. The polished marble floor seemed to pulse beneath her feet, a subtle vibration from the distant orchestra. The music swelled, a more vigorous tune now, drawing couples onto the dance floor. Eleanor observed the swirling colors, the intricate dance of silks and velvets. It was a world she had once belonged to, a world that had cruelly cast her out. Now she was an observer, a guest in a borrowed life, protected by a man who seemed to defy the very rules of this society. She wondered if she would ever feel truly at home again, not in the Vance manor, nor in this glittering alien landscape. The distant clink of champagne glasses punctuated the melody. Then, across the crowded floor, her gaze snagged. A figure moved with a familiar, arrogant grace, his dark hair gleaming under the chandeliers. Lord Arthur Blackwood. He was laughing, his head thrown back slightly, his hand resting possessively on the small of Miss Isabella Sterling's back. Isabella, radiant in shimmering gold, smiled up at him, her eyes wide and adoring. The sight was a punch to Eleanor's gut, a sudden cold rush that threatened to shatter her composure. Her fan trembled in her hand, the delicate ivory suddenly heavy. The memory of that night, the night her world crumbled, crashed over her. The sound of the master of ceremonies' voice, the roar in her ears, the hundreds of eyes. Arthur's face betraying no regret, only a triumphant glint. The pain was still there, a dull ache beneath the surface, but it was different now. It was a scar, not an open wound. It was a reminder of who she had been and who she was determined to become. The scent of Isabella's expensive perfume seemed to drift across the room, an imagined phantom. Arthur and Isabella were moving slowly through the throng, seemingly oblivious to the whispers that had followed Eleanor. They were absorbed in their own gilded bubble, celebrating their new future. Eleanor watched them, her heart beating a frantic tattoo against her ribs. She felt the sudden urge to flee, to disappear into the quiet anonymity of the night. But then she remembered Alaric's words, his steady gaze when he outlined their arrangement. "You will not be a pawn, Eleanor. You will be a queen." The words echoed in her mind, firming her resolve. She would not run. Not again. As Arthur turned to offer Isabella a glass of champagne, his eyes swept across the room, a casual, self-satisfied survey. And then his gaze landed on Eleanor. His laughter died in his throat. The smile that had graced his lips vanished, replaced by a look of utter, profound shock. The glass of champagne he held tilted precariously, a few golden drops spilling onto the marble floor, unnoticed. Eleanor watched the transformation on his face, a perverse satisfaction unfurling within her chest. It was not triumph, not exactly, but a deep, quiet vindication. The air around them seemed to thicken, the ballroom's sounds fading into a distant hum. His eyes, once so familiar, now held a bewildered confusion. He blinked as if to clear a vision, then looked again. He saw not the tear-streaked, humiliated girl he had abandoned, but a woman poised and elegant, radiating an unexpected strength. The emerald gown, the quiet confidence in her posture, the cool fire in her gaze, it was all a stark contradiction to the image he must have held of her, broken and defeated. Isabella, sensing the sudden shift in Arthur's demeanor, looked up at him, then followed his gaze. Her pretty, innocent face registered surprise, then a flicker of apprehension. She tugged gently on Arthur's sleeve, a silent question in her eyes. But Arthur remained transfixed, his gaze locked with Eleanor's. The music seemed to slow, the world narrowing to just these two, separated by a sea of indifferent faces. Eleanor felt the curious glances of those around them, noticing the sudden silence that had fallen over Arthur's small circle. The scent of the expensive wax from the polished floor seemed to rise around her. A charged glance passed between Eleanor and Arthur, a silent volley of emotions. His eyes, usually so confident, now held a dawning regret, a flicker of something almost akin to fear. He saw what he had cast aside, not a weeping victim, but a formidable presence. His jaw tightened, a muscle working furiously beneath his skin. Eleanor felt a cold satisfaction spread through her, chilling the lingering pain. This was not the reunion he had envisioned. She knew. This was not the broken girl he expected to see. Eleanor met his gaze with a cool, distant look, a silent accusation that contained no heat, only ice. Her eyes held the echo of every tear she had shed, every sleepless night, every shattered dream. But those echoes were now tempered by resilience, by a newfound resolve. There was no anger in her expression, only a profound detachment, as if he were a distant, inconsequential figure. She offered no smile, no acknowledgement, simply a steady, unwavering stare that spoke volumes. It said, "You made your choice, Arthur, and I have made mine." He flinched almost imperceptibly, as if struck. The color drained from his face, leaving it pale and drawn beneath the lamplight. He seemed to shrink, his usual arrogant posture faltering under the weight of her indifferent gaze. The smugness, the self-satisfaction that had been so ingrained in his expression crumbled, revealing a flicker of something raw and unsettled. He had sought to humiliate her, to erase her from his gilded future, but now, in this public forum, she was the one holding the power. Isabella, now fully aware of the unspoken drama unfolding, looked from Arthur's stricken face to Eleanor's composed one. Her brow furrowed, a delicate confusion clouding her features. She did not understand the depth of the unspoken exchange, the history laid bare in a single glance. She saw only Arthur's discomfort and the woman who caused it. The gentle rustle of her silk dress was a soft counterpoint to the strained silence. Eleanor held his gaze for what felt like an eternity, though it was likely only a few seconds. The hum of the ballroom seemed to return, the music swelling again, as if the world had momentarily paused just for their silent confrontation. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, Eleanor shifted her focus. She turned her head slightly, her gaze sweeping past Arthur, as if he were merely a piece of furniture, an obstruction in her line of sight. She turned her full attention back to Alaric, a subtle movement that conveyed a complete dismissal. It was a rejection more potent than any spoken word, a quiet severing of any remaining thread between them. Arthur, she sensed, was left reeling, stranded in the aftermath of her silent judgment. His carefully constructed world, built on ambition and ruthless calculation, had just been rattled by a woman he had believed he had utterly destroyed. Alaric Thorne, who had remained silent and watchful throughout the entire exchange, now made a subtle movement. His hand, warm and firm, came to rest lightly on the small of Eleanor's back. It was a protective gesture, a silent claim, a declaration of his presence and her belonging at his Watson. The warmth of his touch seeped through the silk of her gown, sending a tremor through Eleanor. It was not a shiver of fear, but something entirely new, something unexpected. It was a burgeoning sense of power, a feeling that this formidable man, this enigmatic protector, was an ally in a way she had never known. A flicker of connection, warm and undeniable, sparked between them, momentarily eclipsing the grand ballroom, the curious stares, and the lingering ghost of Arthur's betrayal. The low hum of the orchestra seemed to wrap around them, a soft, intimate embrace. Thornhouse's silence enveloped Eleanor. It was a hushed quiet, unlike Vance Manor's gentle decay, more like calm before a storm. She sat by the unlit study fireplace, a heavy book unread. The room held the faint scent of old paper, a smell she now linked to this residence. Shadows danced on the mantelpiece as daylight faded. A distant grandfather clock chimed, marking time's indifferent passage. The ball's whispers still echoed. Arthur's shocked face, briefly regretting, flickered in her mind, a past she shed quickly. Alaric's hand anchored her, a strange shield. Their alliance, born of public shame, held a protection she had not foreseen. Alaric entered, his soft footsteps a subtle announcement. He carried 2 glasses and a decanter of amber liquid. His quiet efficiency impressed her. He offered a glass. "Brandy, Lady Eleanor," he said, his voice low. "It wards off chill and perhaps anxieties." She took the glass, fingers brushing his in a fleeting, electric instant. She dismissed the unexpected current. The glass warmed her palm. He settled opposite, the leather armchair creaking softly. He watched her, stormy gray eyes unreadable, intensely focused. "Thank you, Lord Thorne," she murmured, sipping the smooth brandy. Its warmth eased her tension. "The ball yesterday was quite an event." A faint smile touched Alaric's lips. "Indeed, Lady Eleanor, you showed remarkable composure, admirable grace. Many would have crumbled." His words were not empty flattery, but recognition of inner strength. She felt truly seen, for the first time in years. The weight of family expectations, Arthur's betrayal, society's judgment, all lessened under his gaze. "Grace is often a mask, Lord Thorne," she confessed, surprised by her candor. "A necessary one, when utterly exposed." Alaric nodded, thoughtful. He sipped his brandy. The hearth fire caught, a small flame dancing, warming the room. "A mask, perhaps," he conceded, his voice low, "but one requiring considerable inner strength. Many crumble under public expectation, letting the mask slip." Eleanor traced her glass rim. The silence deepened. She felt an urge to speak, defying her reserve. "My father told me stories," she began, voice soft, "of our ancestors, the Vances, their courage, honor, stubborn pride." She sipped brandy. Alaric remained still, inviting her. He believed in legacy above all else. Our name, our history, a guiding star, even when fortunes faded. A wistful smile touched her lips. He told of Lady Annalise Vance. During the Civil War, she buried our priceless silver in the Rose Garden. She faced the Roundheads with unyielding spirit and iron will. A tremulous sigh escaped her. "She died shortly after the war," Eleanor whispered, "from fever. But she secured our future. My father said her spirit, her resilience, was our true inheritance." She met Alaric's gaze, her eyes moist. It was a raw vulnerability she rarely showed, shedding armor worn for years. A tremor ran through her, wondering if she had said too much. "I often wonder," she barely breathed, "if I have her strength, if I am worthy as our legacy slips away." Quiet descended, broken by a crackling log. Alaric's eyes softened, a flicker of understanding quickly veiled. He leaned forward, placing his glass. He regarded her, and Eleanor's heart fluttered. Had she overstepped? Legacy, Alaric finally said, his voice low. It is a heavy burden, Lady Eleanor, especially when upholding something that exists more in memory than reality. His words resonated, touching a raw nerve. He understood the invisible weight she carried, the pressure to maintain pride amidst despair. Firelight etched his strong jaw, highlighting a subtle scar. My own family, he began, his voice detached. Not traditional aristocracy. My father built his fortune brick by brick from nothing. He believed in hard work, foresight, relentless effort. Eleanor listened, captivated. This was a new Alaric Thorne, not the formidable businessman, but a man revealing his guarded past. It was a crack in his armor, a glimpse of humanity. He used to say, Alaric continued, his gaze distant, the past is a foundation, never a prison. He always looked forward, planned for the next step, the next battle. His jaw tightened, betraying deeper emotion. The air thickened with unspoken history. Eleanor leaned forward, captivated. He lost everything, wonderful ways, Alaric confessed, his voice almost a whisper. A bad investment, a market crash, a betrayal. He was ruined, publicly, humiliatingly. Eleanor felt a pang of empathy. She knew that searing burn of public failure, the deep shame. It was a shared wound. He did not speak of it often, Alaric continued, his eyes meeting hers with new intensity. But I remember the quiet desperation in his eyes, his trembling hands when he thought himself alone. He rebuilt it all, every penny. He clawed his way back. But the cost. He trailed off, lost in memory. Silence, heavy with grief and struggle, settled. Eleanor yearned to reach out, but held back, respecting the fragile moment. The cost of rebuilding, Eleanor murmured, echoing him. It can be immense. It changes a person. He nodded. It teaches you nothing is secure. Trust is a luxury. To protect what is yours, you must build an impenetrable fortress, brick by careful brick. His eyes, holding past pain, hardened slightly, but the glimpse he offered lingered. Eleanor saw not just the powerful businessman, but the boy who witnessed downfall, the man forged by will and intelligence. He was redefined in her eyes. So your ambition, Eleanor ventured, it stems from that experience, to never be vulnerable again? Alaric met her gaze, a wry curve to his lips. Ambition is complicated, Lady Eleanor. Fear is a powerful motivator, but also a profound desire for control, to ensure the ground beneath you never crumbles, to be master of your destiny. He paused, then added, and perhaps to prove legacy is not merely inherited, but earned, forged anew with each struggle, if one is worthy. His words resonated with her, echoing her father's pride. He was driven by personal history, wounds, aspirations. His ambition, once cold, now appeared a shield, born of pain. The room filled with shared understanding. Eleanor smiled, a genuine, unforced smile that reached her eyes. It was born of true, unexpected connection. My father would have admired that, Lord Thorne. Earning one's legacy, not just inheriting it. He would have seen the fire. Alaric's lips quirked into a rare, genuine smile. It softened his face, making him seem human. Eleanor felt a jolt, an inexplicable warmth spreading through her. The air between them, once thick with separate histories, now felt woven together, a delicate, invisible bridge. Perhaps, he conceded, voice softer. He sounds like a man of strong principles. They sat in comfortable silence. Their shared vulnerabilities had irrevocably altered the landscape. The distance thinned, allowing personal connection to shine through. Eleanor looked at him with new perception. She saw lines of experience, profound intelligence, the man beneath the formidable exterior. Not just her protector, but a person with his own wounds, his own battles, his own scars. He had allowed her a rare glimpse into his guarded soul. It was a gift. Her fingers tightened around the glass, her heart beating a quick, unfamiliar rhythm. He met her gaze. His stormy gray eyes deepened, reflecting silent understanding. It was an acknowledgement of shared humanity, two souls finding harbor. A subtle, powerful current passed between them, a silent conversation beyond their pragmatic bargain. Eleanor felt it travel through her, a rush of sensation, a tremor. Her heart raced, a frantic rhythm. Confusion swirled. Was this true connection? This warmth, this dizzying pull towards a man she barely knew, with whom she had made a cold bargain? It was unsettling, thrilling, undeniably real, leaving her breathless, aware of him, of herself, and of the profound shift between them. The quiet of Thorn House, once a blanket of solemnity, now hummed with a different energy for Eleanor. Each creak of the polished floorboards, every distant murmur from the servants' quarters, seemed to carry a weight of purpose she had not noticed before. Alaric Thorn himself, previously an enigma, veiled in power, began to unfold in her mind like a complex, richly layered tapestry. She found herself watching him, not with apprehension, but with a growing, almost academic curiosity. His study became a focal point of her observations. The heavy oak door, often slightly ajar, offered glimpses into a world of ceaseless activity. She would pass by, perhaps on her way to the conservatory, and catch the low cadence of his voice on the telephone, or see him bent over enormous ledgers, his brow furrowed in concentration. The scent of ink and aged paper, mixed with a faint metallic tang she couldn't quite place, drifted from the room. She noticed the precision with which his papers were arranged, the stark efficiency of his workspace, contrasting sharply with the more ornate, almost indulgent decor of the rest of the house. Eleanor understood, with a chilling clarity, that this was not the study of a gentleman idly managing inherited wealth. This was the command center of an empire. She saw men, not always of the polished aristocratic type, entering and exiting with discreet urgency. Some wore the sober suits of bankers, but others had a harder, less refined air, their eyes sharp, their movements economical. They spoke in hushed tones, sometimes with a regional accent and unfamiliar to her, their conversations laced with technical terms she did not grasp, but whose implications of scale and influence were undeniable. She recalled a phrase her late father used to describe certain entrepreneurs: they build their own castles, brick by bloody brick. This was Alaric's castle, and Eleanor began to see the invisible, laborious process of its construction. His wealth was not merely inherited, it was forged, shaped by a relentless will and a mind that saw opportunities where others saw only obstacles. This realization, rather than alarming her, stirred a peculiar chord of recognition within her own spirit. She understood the effort required to rebuild, to maintain, to defy ruin. One afternoon, she found an old, brittle newspaper clipping tucked inside a book on industrial economics in Alaric's library. It was about a textile mill fire years ago, a devastating event in a distant northern town. The small article mentioned a young, ambitious Alaric Thorn, who had reportedly acquired the ruined property for a fraction of its value and rebuilt it into a thriving enterprise, bringing prosperity back to the town. The tone of the article was grudgingly admiring, hinting at a fierce determination that bordered on ruthlessness. She placed the clipping back, her fingers tracing the faded print. The darker, more complex aspects of his business empire were not necessarily villainous, she mused, but perhaps merely uncompromising. Society, in its comfortable complacency, often mistook pragmatism for malice, especially when it came from someone who had not followed the prescribed path of inherited privilege. Alaric had carved his own path, and the scars of that journey, though invisible, were evident in the steely resolve in his eyes, the subtle scar near his temple. She remembered a brief conversation with him about Vance Manor's declining fortunes. His response had been direct, devoid of false sympathy. "Sentimentality does not pay the bills, Lady Eleanor," he had said, his voice low. "Only clear-headed action can preserve what you value." At the time, she had flinched at the bluntness. Now she understood it as a guiding principle, born of experience, not coldness. It was the principle that allowed him to move mountains, to resurrect fortunes from ashes. Her perception of him shifted again, from a mysterious benefactor to a formidable figure who understood the harsh realities of the world with an unflinching gaze. He was a survivor, like herself, though his battles were fought in the boardrooms and marketplaces, while hers had been waged in the quiet desperation of Vance Manor. She recognized the shared resilience, the inner steel that had allowed them both to endure betrayal and impending ruin. It deepened her intrigue, yes, but also her respect. He did not merely possess wealth, he commanded it, molded it, wielded it with a sculptor's practiced hand. Eleanor began to notice how Alaric interacted with his staff. He was demanding yet fair. She never heard him raise his voice, but a single measured word from him seemed to carry more weight than a shouted command from others. There was a loyalty among his household, a quiet precision in their service that spoke volumes. They did not fear him. They respected him, perhaps even admired him. This was a man who inspired not just obedience, but dedication. One evening, during a private dinner in the large, echoing dining room, Alaric spoke briefly of a recent acquisition, a struggling shipping company he intended to revitalize. His eyes, usually guarded, held a spark of intense passion as he described the potential, the jobs it could create, the impact on the port cities. It was not just about profit, Eleanor realized. It was about building, about shaping the future, about leaving a tangible mark on the world. This was the grander, more personal ambition she had sensed. It was a vision, not just a ledger entry. He spoke of the resistance he faced from established families, their attempts to undermine his efforts through political maneuvering and social ostracism. They disliked disruption, Lady Eleanor, he had said, a faint, almost imperceptible curl to his lip. They prefer the world to remain precisely as it has always been, for their own benefit. She saw then that his rise had been a constant battle against the entrenched forces of old money and tradition, much like her own quiet struggle to maintain her family's name against their decay. A profound understanding settled over her. Alaric Thorne was not just a rich man, he was a revolutionary in his own right, challenging the old order with his sheer force of will and intellect. He was an outsider who had built his own empire, independent of inherited titles or ancestral lands. His darker aspects were perhaps nothing more than the pragmatism of a man who knew what it meant to fight for everything he possessed, and who had no patience for the delicate sensibilities of those who had never truly struggled. This growing understanding transformed her internal landscape. The confusion she had felt after their last shared moment in the dimly lit room gave way to a deeper, more resonant warmth. It was not simply a warmth of attraction, but of a burgeoning connection based on shared experience, shared resilience, and a mutual, unspoken understanding of the world's true mechanisms. She saw in him a reflection of the strength she herself desperately sought to cultivate. A few days later, Eleanor attended a small afternoon tea hosted by Lady Charlotte, a distant, rather gossipy cousin. The drawing room buzzed with the usual murmur of society chatter, the clinking of teacups, and the faint scent of lavender. Eleanor, impeccably dressed in a gown Alaric's staff had procured for her, found herself feeling oddly out of place, yet more secure than ever before. Her eyes had been opened to a different truth, a different kind of power. Lady Charlotte, a woman whose opinions were as brittle as her porcelain teacups, steered the conversation toward Alaric Thorne. "Such a peculiar man, wouldn't you agree, Eleanor?" she began, her voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. "So very rich, of course, but entirely without lineage. And they say his methods, well, they are quite uncouth." Another guest, Mrs. Davies, chimed in. "Indeed, my husband heard that he bought out a struggling firm, only to dismantle it and sell off its assets for profit. Heartless, truly." Her eyes, though directed at Eleanor, held a hint of judgment, as if daring her to defend her patron. Eleanor felt a sudden, unexpected surge of protectiveness. She remembered Alaric's comments about the resistance he faced, the dismissive nature of those who benefited from the status quo. Her own family's struggle, the condescension she had endured, flashed through her mind. This was the same kind of narrow-minded judgment, leveled against anyone who dared to operate outside their rigid conventions. "I believe, Lady Charlotte, that Lord Thorne is a man of remarkable vision," Eleanor stated, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the murmurs. She took a sip of her tea, meeting Mrs. Davies' gaze directly. "He has transformed industries, revitalized towns. Perhaps what some perceive as uncouth is merely a directness that society is unaccustomed to. Lady Charlotte's eyebrows rose, a faint blush creeping up her cheeks. Directness, my dear? Or perhaps a disregard for propriety? Propriety often stifles progress, Eleanor countered, choosing her words with care. Lord Thorne, from my observations, values efficiency and genuine contribution over superficial appearances. Many families, including my own, might have benefited greatly from such practical leadership, rather than clinging to outdated traditions. Her voice carried a subtle edge, a quiet defense of her own past, intertwined with her defense of Alaric. Mrs. Davies scoffed softly. But the rumors, my dear, whispers of ruthless dealings, of men ruined in his wake. Rumors, Mrs. Davies, are often bred from envy and fear, Eleanor replied, her gaze unwavering. She felt her heart thumping a steady rhythm in her chest, a stark contrast to the racing pulse she might have had weeks ago. Those who succeed on their own merits, rather than inherited fortune, often face such baseless accusations from those who prefer the old guard to remain undisturbed. A silence fell over the small group. Eleanor could feel their surprised stares, their calculating glances. She had spoken with an authority she never knew she possessed, defending a man whom society largely regarded with suspicion. As she watched their faces, a jolt went through her, a sudden, profound realization that resonated deep within her soul. Her defense of Alaric Thorne had not been an obligation, or even a strategic move. It had been genuine. Her feelings for him, she understood with a rush, had evolved far beyond mere arrangement or gratitude. They had become something deeper, something she fiercely wanted to protect. The Rothschild Grand Ballroom, once the stage of her most profound humiliation, now shimmered with an entirely different light. Eleanor moved through the charity ball, a soft smile playing on her lips, feeling the rustle of her silk gown against her legs. The scent of white roses and expensive brandy mingled in the air, a familiar backdrop to the murmur of polite conversation. She felt a lightness in her step, a quiet confidence that had been absent for so long. Every glance from society matrons, once filled with pity or scorn, now held a hint of admiration, even envy. She had become someone new, someone who walked with her head high, not in defiance but in genuine self-possession. Her gaze drifted over the polished marble, reflecting the warm glow of the chandeliers. She saw Alaric across the room, his dark suit a formidable silhouette against the softer hues of the crowd. He was speaking with a prominent duke, his posture relaxed yet commanding, his voice a low, steady hum. A strange warmth spread through Eleanor's chest. She had grown to understand the quiet strength he possessed, the unwavering support he offered without a single spoken word of assurance. Her life had irrevocably changed since that night he stopped her on the street, shattered and alone. Now she moved through these opulent halls not as a victim, but as a woman discovering her own formidable will. Then a familiar figure appeared at the edge of her vision. Lord Arthur Blackwood. He was observing her, a curious, almost vexed expression etched upon his handsome features. His usual confident smile seemed strained, replaced by a slight frown that tightened the corners of his mouth. Eleanor felt a fleeting tightening in her stomach, a faint echo of the pain he had inflicted. Yet it was just an echo, a distant memory rather than a present wound. His eyes, once so captivating, now seemed merely calculating. He watched her for several minutes, his gaze lingering on the way she held herself, the effortless grace with which she greeted acquaintances. Isabella Sterling was not with him tonight, a small detail Eleanor observed without dwelling on it. Arthur's jaw tightened. He had expected Eleanor to fade into obscurity, perhaps to return to her dilapidated manor and live out her days in genteel poverty. Instead, she had reappeared not only with a mysterious benefactor, but with an aura of power and beauty he had never seen in her before. This transformation was deeply unsettling to him. It challenged his narrative, his carefully constructed justification for abandoning her. He had convinced himself she was weak, a suitable sacrifice for his ambition. Now she seemed anything but weak. He saw the way men looked at her, the respect in their eyes, and a seed of resentment began to fester within him. He had chosen the path of least resistance, the path of wealth and political advantage, And yet Eleanor, the discarded one, now shone brighter than ever. He took a slow sip of his champagne, his thoughts churning. He needed to speak with her, to understand. More than that, he needed to regain some semblance of control over the narrative that was quickly slipping from his grasp. He straightened his waistcoat, a practiced mask of charm falling over his features, and began to make his way toward her, weaving through the clusters of conversing guests. His approach was deliberate, his steps measured, a predator circling its prey, though he failed to realize the prey was no longer vulnerable. Eleanor saw him coming. She had always been acutely aware of her surroundings, a necessity when one walked the tightrope of society. Her heart did not pound with fear or regret as it once might have. Instead, a quiet resolve settled over her. She would face him, she would not shy away. This was her moment, a chance to truly sever the remaining ties to a past that no longer defined her. She met his gaze directly as he stopped before her, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor in her usually steady hand as she adjusted the delicate lace of her sleeve. "Eleanor," Arthur said, his voice smooth, a practiced charm in its tone. It was the same tone he had used to lull her into a false sense of security, the one that promised a future he never intended to deliver. "You look remarkably well." His words, meant as a compliment, carried a subtle undertone of surprise, even disbelief. Eleanor offered a small, polite smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "And you, Arthur? I trust Miss Sterling is enjoying the evening elsewhere." She kept her voice even, devoid of the bitterness that once choked her. Arthur flinched slightly at the mention of Isabella, a momentary flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "She is indeed occupied with her family, but I wish to speak with you, Eleanor. There are things that need to be said, perhaps clarified between us." He lowered his voice, leaning in slightly as if sharing a confidence. The scent of his cologne, once so familiar, now felt vaguely cloying. "I believe everything that needed to be said was quite eloquently articulated at the announcement party, Arthur," Eleanor replied, her voice still calm but with an underlying steel he had not expected. She remembered the collective gasp, the sudden silence, the burning shame that had consumed her own. She would never allow him to inflict such pain again. She held her champagne glass a little tighter, her fingers locking around the delicate stem. If she let go, she feared she would crush it. He paused, clearly taken aback by her directness. His smile faltered. "Eleanor, you misunderstand. I acted out of necessity for the good of my family. You know the pressures I faced. I never meant to cause you such distress." He tried to conjure an expression of regret, but it looked forced, a poorly acted performance. "Necessity often serves as a convenient excuse for cruelty, Arthur," Eleanor countered, her gaze unwavering. "My distress was merely a consequence of your ambition. I understand that now." Her voice was low, ensuring only he could hear her words, but each one landed with the precision of a well-aimed dart. She felt a surge of strength, an almost dizzying sense of power in finally being able to speak her truth without fear. Arthur's composure began to crack. He had anticipated tears, perhaps a plea for understanding, certainly not this cool, analytical dismantling of his excuses. He shifted his weight, his eyes darting around the room, as if seeking an escape or an ally. "Surely you cannot blame me entirely. Our family's fortunes were both in decline. My position, my future, it depended on a strategic alliance. You must see that." He gestured vaguely, encompassing the grandeur of the ballroom, implying that such surroundings required such sacrifices. Eleanor looked around the very room he indicated, her eyes sweeping over the glittering jewels and polished facades. "Indeed, Arthur, I see it perfectly clearly now. I see the price of such ambition, and I recognize that I am no longer willing to pay it." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. "My family's dignity, unlike yours, was not for sale." A vein throbbed faintly in Arthur's temple. His carefully constructed image of himself as a noble, burdened figure was crumbling under her calm assault. He tried a different tactic. "This arrangement you have now with Lord Thorne, it is hardly a position of true independence, is it? You are merely exchanging one master for another, albeit a wealthier one. There was a sneer in his voice now, a desperate attempt to wound her. He tried to imply that she was still a pawn, just in a more elaborate game. A sharp, cold laugh escaped Eleanor's lips, surprising even herself with its unexpected sound. It was not a laugh of mirth, but of profound understanding and a touch of contempt. Arthur, you always saw me through the lens of possession, did you not? First as your betrothed, then as a discarded convenience. You cannot conceive of a woman making choices for herself, forging her own path. She met his sneer with a steady, unflinching gaze. Lord Thorne does not seek to control me, Arthur. He offers opportunity, respect, and a partnership based on mutual understanding, something you clearly know nothing about. Her words hung in the air, a final, unarguable declaration. Arthur's face flushed a deep crimson. His eyes narrowed, filled with a mixture of anger and wounded pride. He opened his mouth, ready to retort, perhaps to launch into a diatribe about her sudden arrogance. But then he faltered. A shadow fell over them. Alaric Thorne had approached, silently, seamlessly, his presence a sudden chill in the air around Arthur. He did not speak. He merely stood beside Eleanor, his immense height and powerful frame creating an undeniable barrier between her and Arthur. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, fixed on Arthur with an intensity that brooked no argument. There was no aggression in his posture, only an unyielding, unshakable presence that radiated unspoken warning. Eleanor felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a protective cocoon forming around her. She glanced at Alaric. In a flicker of acknowledgement, a silent understanding passed between them. His presence was not just a physical barrier. It was a psychological one, reinforcing her strength, validating her defiance. She felt the quiet thrum of his power, a deep, resonant hum that settled her own heart. She was not alone. She had not been alone for quite some time. Arthur's gaze flickered from Eleanor's composed face to Alaric's unreadable one. He saw the quiet, protective stance, the unwavering intensity in Alaric's eyes. All the bluster, all the carefully prepared retorts died on his tongue. He was utterly disarmed. He had underestimated Eleanor, and now he stood exposed, his petty attempts at sabotage rendered utterly meaningless by the sheer, formidable force of Alaric Thorne. The subtle scent of leather and a faint, metallic tang, always present around Alaric, now seemed to fill the air, a silent declaration of his unwavering support. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. The easy charm had completely vanished, replaced by a sullen resentment. He offered a strained, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of defeat more than politeness. Eleanor, he said again, the name sounding hollow this time, lacking any of his previous proprietary tone. Lord Thorne. His voice was barely a whisper now, stripped of its former confidence. Without another word, Arthur turned on his heel. He did not storm off in a dramatic exit, but rather retreated with a deflated, almost shrunken posture. He moved quickly through the crowds, no longer making eye contact. His shoulders hunched, his ambition momentarily bruised, and his pride utterly shattered. He disappeared into the throng, a defeated figure swallowed by the glittering anonymity of the ballroom room. A soft sigh escaped Eleanor's lips, a release of tension she hadn't realized she was holding. She watched Arthur's retreating back until he was entirely out of sight. A profound sense of liberation washed over her, a quiet triumph that settled deep within her bones. The ghost of her past, the pain he had inflicted, had finally been laid to rest. She felt an incredible lightness, as if a heavy cloak of expectation had been lifted from her shoulders. She turned to Alaric, her eyes soft, filled with an unspoken gratitude. His gaze met hers, a silent, knowing connection passing between them. There was no need for words. He understood. He had always seemed to understand, anticipating her needs, offering support just when it was most required. His lips curved upward in a subtle, almost imperceptible smile, a slow, proud warmth in his eyes that spoke volumes. It was a smile that mirrored the triumph she felt, a shared victory that deepened the already profound bond between them. The notes of a waltz swelled, pulling at something deep within the grand ballroom. Eleanor felt its rhythm resonate not just in the polished floor beneath her feet, but in the very core of her being. Tonight was another gathering of the city's elite, a vibrant tapestry of silk and jewels, laughter, and calculated glances. Yet, unlike the first time she had faced such a crowd, a quiet strength now settled within her. No longer was she the proud girl clinging to a tattered dignity, but a woman standing firm, her gaze meeting the world head-on. Alaric Thorne stood beside her, a steady presence, his dark suit a stark contrast to the glittering array of colors around them. His presence was a palpable force, a quiet anchor in the swirling current of society. He offered his hand, a silent invitation, and Eleanor placed hers within it, feeling the familiar warmth and solidness that had become her unexpected sanctuary. Their eyes met, a fleeting moment of understanding passing between them, before they moved onto the dance floor. The music enveloped them, a graceful current that drew them into its intricate steps. She felt the subtle pressure of his hand at her waist, guiding her, an almost imperceptible communication that spoke volumes. Their steps were perfectly aligned, a seamless flow that suggested hours of practice, though they had never rehearsed. It was as if their very souls knew the melody, anticipating each turn, each glide, each delicate pause. Eleanor's crimson gown swirled around her, a rich silk that felt like a second skin, accentuating her every movement. She could almost forget the hundreds of eyes fixed upon them, drawn into the private world they created within the dance. The air in the ballroom was thick with the scent of lilies and expensive champagne, a heady mix that usually made Eleanor's head spin. Tonight, however, her senses felt acutely sharpened, every detail magnified. She saw the flickers of curiosity in the faces watching them, the subtle shifts in expressions as they witnessed the effortless harmony between her and Alaric. A faint smile touched Alaric's lips, a rare, almost imperceptible curve that Eleanor knew was meant only for her. It was a secret shared, a silent acknowledgement of the connection that had bloomed between them. She felt a blush creep onto her cheeks, a warmth that had nothing to do with the dance's exertion. It was the warmth of being truly seen, truly valued, in a way she had never known. Her fingers locked around Alaric's, a secure grip that felt less like a formal dance hold and more like a promise. Each turn brought them closer, their eyes meeting, holding, then gracefully breaking apart, only to reconnect again. It was a dance of unspoken words, of burgeoning emotions, painted for all the world to see. Whispers, faint at first, began to ripple through the assembly. Eleanor caught fragments, names woven together, Lady Vance, Lord Thorne, an arrangement, then, more daringly, romance. The words were no longer tinged with the dismissive tone she had once endured. Instead, they carried a note of awe, of genuine speculation. The initial skepticism surrounding their alliance had slowly given way to a profound curiosity, and now it seemed to a reluctant admiration. Eleanor felt a thrill, a strange mixture of apprehension and triumph. Her heart beat a rapid, insistent rhythm against her ribs, echoing the tempo of the waltz. She remembered the crushing humiliation of that first night, the raw pain of public betrayal. Now, standing here, enveloped in Alaric's steady embrace, she felt a quiet strength she never thought possible. His gaze was unwavering, a deep, fathomless ocean that held an intensity that both calmed and stirred her. As the music swelled towards its crescendo, Alaric spun her in a final elegant turn. For a brief moment, she was suspended, her dress fanning out around her like a dark bloom, before he drew her gently back to him. His touch was firm, yet tender, holding her just a fraction of a second longer than was strictly necessary for the dance. It was a fleeting intimacy that spoke volumes, a silent declaration that transcended the formal steps of the waltz. The music ended, the final notes lingering in the air like a trio. A smattering of applause, more robust than usual, filled the sudden silence. Eleanor felt a rush of exhilaration, her breath catching in her throat. She looked up at Alaric, her eyes wide, her chest rising and falling with emotion. His expression was unreadable, as always, but his eyes held a warmth she had come to recognize, a quiet acknowledgement of the moment they had just shared. They moved off the dance floor, the crowd parting slightly to let them pass. Eleanor could feel the weight of their gazes, the unspoken questions hanging in the air. The whispers were no longer just fragments. They were more pronounced, more confident. The narrative had shifted irrevocably. No longer was she merely the woman saved from ruin by the enigmatic Lord Thorne. She was now seen as something more, something profoundly connected to him. Later, as the evening progressed, Eleanor found herself speaking with Mrs. Albright, a formidable woman known for her keen observations and sharp tongue. Mrs. Albright's eyes, usually critical, held a flicker of something akin to approval. "Lady Eleanor," she began, her voice a low murmur, "you have blossomed. One might even say, you shine." It was high praise from such a source, and Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her. "Thank you, Mrs. Albright," Eleanor replied, her voice steady. She felt Alaric's presence at her side, a silent support that gave her confidence. He simply listened, his gaze sweeping over the room, yet Eleanor knew his attention was entirely on her. "And Lord Thorne," Mrs. Albright continued, her gaze turning to Alaric, a speculative glint in her eye, "you have quite the knack for cultivating beauty. This arrangement of yours seems to be bearing rather lovely fruit." Her words were laced with double meaning, a playful jab at the society gossip that now openly discussed their arrangement as a burgeoning romance. Alaric offered a slight, enigmatic smile. "I prefer to think of it as recognizing inherent worth, Mrs. Albright," he said, his voice smooth and even. "Some things merely require the right environment to flourish." His eyes flickered to Eleanor, a subtle message in their depths. She felt a shiver run down her spine, a delicious mix of anticipation and disbelief. He excused them gently, guiding Eleanor away from the small cluster of guests. They found themselves near a tall window, looking out onto the gas-lit city streets. The hum of the party felt distant here, a muted backdrop to their quiet moment. Eleanor's heart still thrummed from the dance, from the intensity of Alaric's gaze, from the sudden shift in society's perception. "They speak of us differently now," Eleanor said, her voice barely a whisper, turning to face him. She met his eyes, searching for a deeper meaning, for the unspoken answers to the questions swirling within her. Alaric's expression softened, a rare, unguarded look that made Eleanor's breath catch. He reached out, his hand slowly, deliberately, covering hers where it rested on the cool marble sill. His touch was feather-light at first, then firm, a gentle pressure that sent a jolt through her entire being. It was a profound warmth, an electric current that traveled from her hand, up her arm, and settled directly in her chest. Every fiber of her being awakened. Her skin tingled, her mind reeled. It was more than a simple touch, it was a connection, a sealing of something that had been building between them for weeks, months even. The casual gesture spoke of ownership, of tenderness, of a profound intimacy that transcended their carefully constructed arrangement. It made the unspoken undeniable. Eleanor felt a sudden lightness, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. All the public speculation, the private doubts, the carefully maintained facade of their partnership dissolved in the sheer power of that simple touch. It was a promise, a revelation, a silent declaration that resonated with a truth she had only dared to dream of. Her fingers instinctively curled around his, accepting the warmth, the strength, the unspoken future his touch implied. She looked at him, her vision blurring slightly with unshed tears. This was not the cold calculation of her former engagement. This was a profound, deeply felt connection that stirred her very soul. This was real. His thumb gently stroked the back of her hand, a tender gesture that solidified the surge of emotion within her. She felt herself leaning into his presence, drawn by an invisible current, a yearning she could no longer deny. The room around them, once a cacophony of sound and light, faded into a soft blur. All that existed was Alaric's hand, his unwavering gaze, and the intoxicating rush of feelings within her. This was the moment their world shifted, the moment their carefully maintained distance shattered into a million sparkling fragments. The arrangement, born of desperation and strategy, had transformed into something far more profound, far more real. As the evening drew to a close, the final guests beginning their departures, Alaric turned fully towards her. His hand still cradled hers, a silent anchor. He looked deeply into Eleanor's eyes, his own stormy depths holding a silent question, hinting at a future beyond their initial agreement. Morning light filtered through thorn house curtains. Eleanor stood by a tall window, her fingers tracing the cool glass. A faint mist bloomed under her touch. This day marked a turning page. The air felt crisp, a promise of new beginnings. Yet old pain still whispered in her heart. She closed her eyes, letting memories wash over her, no longer with crushing force, but like a distant tide. She saw the Rothschild Grand Ballroom again, glittering lights and mocking laughter. The master of ceremonies, his voice a hammer blow, announced Arthur's engagement to Isabella, not to her. That raw humiliation carved a canyon through her soul. Her family's fading name, their financial ruin pressed down, threatening her spirit. She stumbled into the cold night, tears blinding her, desperate for escape. Then Alaric appeared, a shadow offering a lifeline. His carriage, his unsettling proposal presented a stark choice: pride or her family's survival. She chose survival, a desperate decision. It unexpectedly led her to this quiet room, to a strength she never knew. The path of their arrangement was uncertain. It had remade her. She learned society's currents, meeting veiled insults with a cool gaze. She found her voice, a quiet, unwavering conviction. A gentle knock stirred her. Sarah, her maid, spoke softly. "Lady Eleanor, Lord Thorne awaits you in the drawing room." Eleanor turned, a knowing smile on her lips. Shame had long evaporated, replaced by quiet confidence. She had walked through fire and emerged stronger. She smoothed her deep emerald green gown. Today she was truly living. She found Alaric by the fireplace, a book open, his gaze distant. The scent of old leather in his cologne filled the air. He looked up, his stormy eyes softening as they met hers. She saw a depth of affection that caught her breath. The air between them hummed with comfortable energy, an unspoken language from countless shared evenings. He closed the book. "Eleanor," he murmured, "you look magnificent." It was an acknowledgement of the inner radiance he now saw. She felt warmth spread through her chest. "And you, Alaric," she replied, her voice steady, "are as inscrutable as ever." A faint, rare smile touched his lips, chasing away some guardedness. He extended a hand, she accepted. His fingers closed around hers, firm, sending a familiar jolt. It was a connection beyond words, a silent promise. They stood holding hands, gazing into dancing flames. The silence was rich with shared history. Eleanor's heart beat steadily with belonging. Memories of humiliation, of Arthur's betrayal, receded further, like shadows banished by a brilliant sun. Alaric turned fully, his thumb caressing her hand. His veiled eyes now held open honesty. "Eleanor," he began, a whisper, "our journey started from necessity, a bargain. I offered to save your family. You, in turn, offered me something I had long forgotten." He paused, his gaze searching hers. Eleanor squeezed his hand, urging him on. "I have seen you transform," he continued, gaining strength, "from a wounded woman to one of fierce spirit and unwavering grace. Your pride, Lady Eleanor, is a deep, honorable core. I admire it beyond measure." A hot tear pricked Eleanor's eye, not of sorrow but profound gratitude. Alaric wiped it away gently. "I confess," he said, vulnerable, "I saw you as a strategic partner, but you have become so much more. You brought light into life often cloaked in shadows. You showed me true connection, genuine warmth, a partnership built on affection." His gaze intensified. "Eleanor, I no longer wish for our bond to be an arrangement. I wish for a true partnership of hearts. I admire you, I respect you, and I love you, Eleanor Vance. Not as a means to an end, but as the woman you are." Eleanor's heart leapt, a wild, exhilarating drumbeat. His words, rare honesty from a man of concealment, resonated deep within her. The warmth between them blossomed into a fierce, incandescent flame. She had never dared hope for such a declaration, not after her crushing betrayal. But here it was, offered freely. "Alaric," she whispered, thick with emotion, "I felt it too. This connection, this understanding. You were my protector, my confidant, my anchor. You saw strength in me when I felt only weakness. You believed when my own faith faltered." She stepped closer, cupping his cheek. His subtle scar seemed to soften under her touch. "I thought my heart was broken beyond repair," she trembled. "But you mended it. You showed me true respect, true affection. I love you too." Profound relief washed over Alaric's face, a vulnerability that transformed his features. He pulled her gently into his embrace, her head resting against his chest. She heard his heart's strong, steady beat, a comforting rhythm of safety and belonging. His arms tightened, a silent affirmation of his words, of their shared future. They remained, existing in the quiet intimacy of their declaration. The world outside faded. The past felt like a distant echo, a journey leading her here. Pain was acknowledged, but it no longer defined her. Her future, once terrifying, now sparkled with the promise of shared dreams and a deep mutual bond. Alaric pulled back slightly, his eyes holding hers, a radiant warmth shining. "Tonight," he said low and firm, "we step out not as an arrangement, Eleanor, but as partners, as a unit. Let them see what we have built." Eleanor nodded, fierce determination settling in her heart. She was ready. Hours later, Alaric's grand carriage drew up to the Countess of Pembroke's winter ball. The air hummed with hooves, voices, and gaslight glow. The ballroom held the same opulent energy as that dreadful night, but Eleanor carried a different spirit this time. Alaric offered his arm, his touch firm and grounding. As they stepped out, chill air brushed her skin, but a quiet warmth bloomed within. She looked at his strong, resolute profile. Profound peace settled over her. This was her partner, the man who nurtured her strength, who stood beside her not out of obligation, but out of love. They entered the ballroom. The crowd hushed. All eyes turned as they had that other night. But these gazes held curiosity, admiration, envy, not pity. Eleanor felt their scrutiny, but it did not pierce her. She held her head high, gaze steady, a quiet smile playing on her lips. She was no longer the abandoned girl. She was Lady Eleanor Vance, standing tall beside Lord Alaric Thorne, a woman defined by resilience and newfound love. Her eyes scanned the room. She saw Arthur and Isabella. Arthur's face, once smug, now held regret, perhaps bitterness. Isabella looked paler, her smile less bright. Their eyes met across the ballroom. Eleanor felt quiet detachment. The pain was gone, anger dissipated, only profound closure remained. He was a closed chapter, a lesson learned. Laric's hand squeezed her arm, a silent message of triumph. He leaned closer. "They watch us, Eleanor. Let them." A knowing smile touched her lips. "Let them indeed," she murmured back, full of quiet strength. They moved through the room, greeting acquaintances, handling veiled questions with graceful composure. Alaric remained at her side, a formidable presence, his gaze often returning to her, a deep, possessive warmth in his eyes. He introduced her as Lady Eleanor, my partner in all things, a subtle declaration that spoke volumes. Later, by a large window overlooking snow-dusted gardens, they found respite from the swirling crowd. Eleanor leaned her head against Alaric's shoulder. Comfortable silence settled between them. The scent of pine and champagne mingled with the quiet melody of a distant string quartet. "It feels different," she said softly, peace in her voice. Alaric shifted, wrapping an arm around her. "It is different," he confirmed, his voice a low thrum against her ear. "You are different." She smiled, turning to him. His eyes, usually keen and observant, now focused solely on her, tender devotion softening their depths. "We are different," she corrected gently. "We built something real, Alaric." He nodded, a rare open smile. "Yes, something stronger than any societal expectation, stronger than any betrayal." Eleanor looked at the glittering society below, the faces she had once feared. They were merely figures in a grand painting now, their opinions holding no sway. Her pride, once a shield, was now a quiet radiance, born of self-acceptance and a profound mutual love. Her heart, once so broken and adrift, now beat with a steady, joyful rhythm, finally at peace and full.